everything's working in tech world.
Hi, how are you? We might be the only two on video, so.
And there we go. Okay. Jim and I were actually just coming from a webinar.
It's true.
So on EdWeb.
I think we had, I don't know what the exact number was. It was around 1,200, I think we're on, so.
Well, excellent. Well, welcome, Jim and Lisa.
I don't know if we're social distancing with our webinars apart. How far apart do webinars have to be?
Well, I mean, I literally just ended that webinar at
I know
3:10 Central Time. So
I left you early.
It gave me enough time to decompress with my client, look over the numbers, grab a glass of wine, and it's 4:30 in the East Coast.
On water still. All of you out there, please feel free to go to the fridge.
Feel free. And we're on video.
Right. So before we start, again, I'd like to thank you for joining us today. And for those that have just joined us, welcome to Advancing Global's Reaching Forward 2020 online seminar. Just a couple production details is that the presentations are recorded and we will provide the recordings and the slides to all the attendees. You'll receive a follow-up email with the links. During the presentation, as Lisa and Jim just shared, please submit your questions through chat. And then we'll present your questions to both Lisa and Jim during the question and answer session, which is normally about 10 minutes before we conclude. If you encounter any technical difficulties, please let us know through chat and we will try to work with you. And so Jim and Lisa, I'm going to turn it over to you regarding professional development and lead generation.
All right. Ed, thank you so much. And really, thank you to Michael Campbell and Advancing Global EDU for putting this session together. It's really great. I mean, it's wonderful to be able to do this. And I think although we're losing some things in some ways by not being together face to face, I think we're finding some lemonade that we're making out of this too. So Jim, it's great to have you here with me doing this. So let's get started. I'm going to share my screen.
You share your screen. I just want to echo what Lisa was saying. Just so appreciative of Michael, Ed, Shauna. The whole team has just been fantastic, and it's great to be able to connect with industry colleagues and friends, and glad to be here. So thanks for having me.
It's great. And you know, I sent Shauna a couple of polls. Shauna, I don't know how to run the polls in here, and maybe I'd have to stop sharing for you to do it. But can we just run those to start? Okay, if you can hear me, great. Are you currently using professional learning as a channel for lead generation? Yes, consistently. Yes, occasionally. No, but would like to try. No, we haven't considered this yet. All right, great. We'll give it a few minutes. Skewing a little bit more towards yes. All right, let's end that one. All right, and then the next one is all right, I guess we'll end that poll. I guess I'll share results this way. Well, maybe that didn't work. Let's do the second poll. All right, I think we'll stop that because here we go. Okay, so just kind of had a curiosity question, you know, how are your current lead gen channels working in this new time of social distancing and remote connectivity? So are your results down, about the same, or have they perhaps even improved?
Interesting.
You hearing me okay, Jim?
Yeah, I hear you perfectly.
Oh, yep. Okay, okay.
Yeah. All right, so people are holding their own, so that's good. Mostly steady.
Little up, little down. Okay, great. Let's see here. I have never used the polling feature in Zoom before, so that's a new thing for me. All right, so we're going to close out of that. All right, here we go. All right, so Jim, we're here to talk about professional learning as a powerful way to reach educators, right? All right,
We are, and if you were listening in just as Lisa and I signed on, I literally am a half hour removed from just having done a webinar with a client of mine, and it was fantastic. It was really good. So yeah, so let's do this. Let's talk about it.
All right, let's do it. And Jim and I are going to use a case study from EdWeb and his client, but we wanted to talk to you about this sort of in general as well, because a lot of the tools that we use at EdWeb, you can use as well. So we wanted to give you an idea of what are the components of it. And when I started EdWeb 10 years ago, we really got into professional learning and webinars as a way to sort of add adrenaline to community experience where it's mostly asynchronous connectivity. And what professional learning can do as a webinar, and we do integrate it with community, that is a great way to do it, but you're providing it's another way to do content marketing. And you're helping educators keeping up with their best practices. It really facilitates peer-to-peer learning. It's a way for educators right now, especially when you have an open chat. It's a great way for them to share their experiences and get support from each other. We also help them earn PD hours, and everybody can do that to some extent. So Jim, maybe you want to talk about some of the sponsor benefits from it.
Yeah, so we've been working with actually 3 different clients on a very steady basis to implement a webinar strategy, and the results have been really strong. And it's interesting. So for sure, we're generating leads. Our cost per lead is really low, so that's obviously a primary goal. But I think what's really interesting is we're getting a lot of insight into how educators and education decision makers are responding to our story. And so it's really forced us to put a lot of polish on our story. So when you're presenting to, in this case, just less than an hour ago, I had 1,200 educators on the line. You're getting a lot of insight in real time about what works and what doesn't. And I think that's a huge benefit to us, is just that constant push to refine our story. So it's been really good for us.
Yeah, and I was listening to Jane Rattenhausen's great presentation just before us for J. Daly Associates, and she kept stressing throughout, tell, don't sell. And I think that's really a message that we're hearing a lot these days. This isn't the time to be out front selling, but to telling your story, or being there with professional learning and support. So that all kind of ties in. So Jim, I thought maybe we'd go through, we can go back and forth on this, or,
Sure.
What are the successful, components of a professional learning program when you're going to use it for this dual purpose, right? Of providing support and learning to educators, and also as a marketing, content, and lead generation solution. So I always start with, presenting a timely topic. And I think remote learning is one of the most timely topics right now.
I agree. It's all about relevance. And so you have to be careful, even though what we do is we schedule months in advance, actually, but we're pretty agile, almost to a fault. So we were shaping our story up until this morning, to be honest. But really, right. Today's focus was on summer reading, for example. 3 weeks ago, or 4 weeks ago, we did remote social reading in the context of COVID, actually. I don't know what the official title was, but it was really timely for us, and it has to be relevant. So yeah, so you can still schedule well in advance, but yeah, being timely is really important.
Right. And we're doing the front and center thing here is really a webinar. We on EdWeb call them Ed webinars, or we also do leader panels. But these formats, we're on Zoom right now. There are multiple webinar platforms out there that you can use. So that does seem to be the predominant vehicle for that. And so what it enables you to do is, invite and, take your topic and then invite innovative educators. Jane in the last session was talking about your fans, and identifying your fans. It's a great way to bring those folks on to talk with each other and to do it in a way that makes them really engaging. We like to use as many of the tools as possible. So in this image here, this was a really fun one. It was on infographics with the, the Star Wars theme, make the infographic be with you, with, both of the presenters, Shaylin Farnsworth and Stephen Anderson on webcams and the chat going along the side. And I don't think they showed any video, but you can use a lot of these tools in interesting ways to make this remote learning experience more engaging. Don't you think, Jim?
Well, the peer-to-peer thing's essential. So
Right.
in the case study, we'll cover it. We actually are really focusing on the CEO, but that's because they have actually a fast-growing number of clients, but we're still nurturing them along. So sometimes you have to wait for that real ambassador to emerge. But in other webinars I've been doing, we've definitely been using educators. And in fact, we had one where it was a teacher and a coach, and the tech was a little goofy inside the school. So they shared earbuds. So they were literally sitting shoulder to shoulder. We can't do that anymore, but it created, having those educators was really about underscoring our credibility and making sure that we're using teacher speak, which is pretty important. And along the way, as you note here, we were using the tools available to us. So you demonstrated that with Zoom by having a poll up in front. What we often do is we poll for who's here, so we get a sense of the audience, and then we'll ask 2 or 3 questions about what are your biggest issues, what are you confronting with, and then if you're using a chat, we find that's really powerful. So the one I just did this afternoon, I was really acknowledging people by first name. Thanks, Lisa. Thanks, Jane. All these names coming in, I would acknowledge where they're from, and I would say, thank you for that question. And it offered a lot of value. And I think people really engaged in that way. So it became pretty powerful. And now we have a big community that we have, thousands upon thousands of people now as part of our community that we can market to. So before and after, we're starting to really build a following. It's pretty powerful.
Yeah, I mean, jumping ahead down here, to the last part is, it's content that can, keep that community connected, right? Because you can post resources that were related to it, or remind people to watch it, or start a discussion on it. So it becomes an asset that helps you build that community. We have an EdWeb community, but you might use Twitter or Facebook, or maybe have your own. But community is really where you then want to, community and email and social to nurture those leads, because that's what's going to make them convert.
That's true, actually. And I forgot to mention that before, which is we now have an asset that we can use. So we're using it in advance of meetings. So if we have a particularly important sales meeting coming up, one thing we can do, and we have done, is say you might be interested to learn more about us through this webinar, and they have a place to go, and we tell them what it's about, where it is, and how long it is. So we kind of level set expectations, but it's kind of interesting the way in which we get to use that as an asset now. It's pretty important.
And you can pull clips out of it and make it a little teaser in an email. You can do different things. And, I do think we have a tendency to talk about promoting these events beforehand, which we do, right? Promoting them beforehand through email and social media. I say email still continues to be by far the most powerful, but you also want to promote it afterwards, because a lot of people right now can't always come to the live event or don't have time to register, but the opportunity to view it on demand afterwards, do a whole post campaign with it as well.
Well, we had a webinar from April that we ended up having, I think, 3,500 register, 1,500 were there, and then it maxed out. But that video has generated 8,000 leads for us due to the playback. So people logging in and playing back, and we've been, pushing out. That was a really unexpected bump for us. But I think it validates your point, which is it's not just the run up to and then the day of. It's got this long trail effect that you can take advantage of, and we've seen really good outcomes from that.
Yep. And then with EdWeb, we offer certificates, and we've become very widely approved for those, which is great. You know, we're frequently approved at the state level, but educators are frequently, you know, go to a workshop or they go to a conference or they'll go back to going to a conference one of these days. But you can give them a certificate for whatever they do with you. And, you know, there might be, you know, the opportunity for them to use it to get credit for something. So always suggest giving credit. So Jim, we thought we'd use GLOWS as a case study here, right? So
Sure.
would you like to talk about this a little? Having just come from their latest webinar?
Having just come from that. So it's interesting. So with these folks, company based in Europe, had been operating in the consumer space for a good long while, was starting to get drawn into the school space through teacher demand. And actually going back as far as last September, October, we did something a little unusual for a webinar. We actually used it to field test our message, which you might think is kind of unorthodox, and perhaps it is, but it was a way for us to get front and center with the story, with a lot of people in one place, and we could get real-time reaction. We could, get questions posed to us in the moment, realize, where we're strong, where we need to shore up our story. And it became a really good research exercise. I don't necessarily recommend that. There was a number of circumstances that allowed us to pull that off, but it became a great research exercise. Now, subsequent to that, we've been using webinar strategy at GLOWS for Education via a series. And what's nice is we can land on a specific topic and then promote the next one. And I've done that for a number of clients. We had one that focuses on professional development, and their specialty is classroom management, school culture, and leadership coaching. And so we had a teacher, a coach, a principal, we had an author. It was a really strong series. But in the case of GLOWS, we've done a series of these, and we actually just today started to experience repeat attendees. So people came in and said, I'm familiar with GLOWS. Webinars are always really strong. So it's pretty interesting actually that we've engaged them over time.
That's very cool.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit more.
Navigating here, right?
You want me? Are you navigating? Do you want me to navigate?
You can if you can. I'm sorry, not sure how the tools are working, but if you can do it, go for it.
I cannot. So it's on you. So yeah, so they officially launched at FETC in 2020. Theirs is a reading platform, delivers a global library of fiction and nonfiction titles. They have a social reading experience that is either individual or shared among a classroom. And the interface is customizable to that individual, but then also allows for annotation. So you can highlight, you can tag, you can put text emojis, you can even share video and audio reactions. So it becomes a really interactive experience for readers. Founded, like I said, in 2014, and their actual global headquarters is in Paris. And then they're working with us here up in Scranton, Pennsylvania, which is their default global headquarters. They haven't, signed off on that yet, but I'm working on it.
Well, and he was presenting from Paris, so that was.
He was presenting from Paris, yeah, and me from Scranton, the Paris,
which is another great thing about the advantage of social distancing on a webinar.
True. Oh yeah, it's true.
Right.
So our goals.
Talk about what some of your goals.
Yeah, I mean our goals, like I mentioned. I'm sorry I wasn't navigating before, but we did want to attract early adopters and get response to that, and it worked really well. So we did it in the run up to ILA last fall, the Literacy Association, where we did another exercise of recruiting and doing interviews on site. So that combination of doing a webinar, pressure testing our story, and then being at ILA was really strong. And now we're just executing a series of webinars. It gets stronger every time, so we can build out our awareness. We're trying to drive to our free trials, and we're getting qualified leads. So today, we already had multiple demo requests, sales requests, signups for our free trials. And so we're starting to really meet our goals. I should remind our client how well we're doing.
Pretty Awesome.
The next
Yes,
slide.
right. Be sure you remind him.
Yeah, by the way, we're doing really well.
You are doing really well with this.
Um,
So
yeah.
we have just a little bit of process here, Jim, right? Like, how do we kind of go through this? Because, if people want to do a program like this, it kind of can follow in the same way. But, as a company that helps organizations do this with EdWeb, we create a landing page for people who come and do it with us and book it through the platform that we use, which is anymeeting.com. But people have their different tools for doing this. So, but Jim, I guess it's helpful to have somebody help you with this when you're trying to get a startup going.
In our case, for Glos, just capacity was an issue. So having a home base was really good. At EdWeb, it just made sense because you have a broad community. We have a home base where we can point people and takes care of the registration process. It's not necessarily required, folks. You can stand up your own landing page. You can use, a GoToMeeting, a WebEx, a Zoom even, and drive your community to that. I find that there's some, so we've done some of that with other clients. I do find though that being connected to EdWeb, and it could be that you want to connect to another credible educator network or brand that's somewhat neutral. I do find that's very effective. Just that ability to come off with the right tone has been good for us. And
That's
so
interesting to hear. I don't
yeah,
know.
it's been helpful for us because people feel like, okay, it's inside an environment that's focused on PD, so I'm going to go and get PD. I have found when you try and stand up your own, there's this sort of level of skepticism that meets it and says, well, am I going to a PD webinar or am I going to a kind of a sneaky sales pitch? And so I think the alignment to EdWeb has been good for us. And if you're on this call listening in, find your either EdWeb or some other group that you can align with, I think is a good advantage.
Yeah. And we also, always say it should be professional learning, not connected to the purchase of a product. We don't want people to feel like they have to buy something to get something out of the presentation. But there are so many free things right now, and we are all about sharing free tools and applications. So in this case with Glows being a freemium model, right? That works. That's fine.
For sure worked. And you notice the screenshot, by the way, from the webinar. So this is a theory that I developed in having observed the market over 20 plus years. When we go through a big upset, we respond as a market. So 9/11 is somewhat similar. It wasn't as extended in its impact on school closure for sure. So as we looked at what's happening in the context of COVID, I kind of came up with this 4 stages of remote engagement. This idea that all schools were responding in April and trying to figure out food and devices, among many others.
Absolutely.
Then they're trying to figure out momentum and get to productivity and progress. And really what we started to work towards was a reset. And so the point I'm trying to make is that this is 4 stages of remote engagement. It's not the 4 key features of Glows for Education. That's an important distinction.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, you'll really turn people off there.
Yeah, exactly. What do we have next? Oh, the promotion part. So I actually am a marketer primarily. I was not fortunate enough to be an educator. So sometimes I think that was part of what helped to make this successful, thinking about it from that point of view. But, with EdWeb, we do e-newsletters, we do solo email campaigns for each webinar that we do, and the same with a social media campaign. And we have very large circulation, and that marketing campaign is included in what you do with us. But, Jim, maybe, I mean, don't you still feel like email and social media? Do you think there are other things that are important to putting things on your website, but just the different ways up front you can get attendance in your event?
Email continues to be strong for us. And I hear that from a lot of our clients, and it continues to deliver results, which is interesting. Now, I wouldn't recommend doing that in isolation. We at Glows will generate a multiple round email campaign in support of a webinar or another program. We know it's also happening in parallel at EdWeb. It's another good reason to have a companion piece, but you might find a media outlet is doing something similar. And then social is sort of a companion piece to that as well. But it's interesting that of these, we find email tends to continue to just deliver good results.
It does. I know. And you can get segmentation through that. We have it through our own list or the email providers. There's MCH and MDR and Agile. They all have segmentation. You can do it by role, you can do it by demographics, you can do it by geography, right? So I think that's part of the power of email.
Yeah, for sure. That segmentation is key. We, some of you may know, I worked closely with ClassLink for a number of years, and in leading that, the progress of that marketing apparatus, we went from what a friend of mine at MDR calls broadcast to narrowcast, and we really started to do a better job of segmenting, and we had a lot of good results from that. And the same is true for our webinars. We started to actually, so it's interesting, the stronger we get, the more confined we are in our segmentation. So at first, like a lot of small companies, we'll happily talk to anyone who wants to talk to us. But now as we get traction, we have a big following, we can start to shape that around our specific audiences, and it's worked pretty well.
Well, the other thing we're aware of too is a lot of the referrals within education. So I would say at least 10% of the attendance that we get is because an educator recommended it to somebody else. So that could be somebody who's a principal or an administrator or a peer or an association that they're a member of. So we're always trying to balance the kind of the broadcast and the narrowcast. So let's see here. Showtime. So you just had a showtime an hour ago.
We did. We had, it's funny. We had, one of the things is, and we go through tips later on in this session, you and I, Lisa, we're going to go through some tips, but when it comes to showtime, like make sure you have your stuff together. Make sure you know how to use the tools, that your video is set up, your lighting is strong. I mean, I can't help the way I look, but I can help the way my background looks and the lighting happens. But the thing you don't want to do is have a lot of pause, a lot of awkward pauses where you're trying to figure out how something works.
Like I was trying to run those polls in the beginning. Didn't have to,
well, I wasn't going to say anything, but that tends to slow momentum down. And so what I do often is I encourage the chat. So that's why I name people and where they're from. I throw silly stories. They're kind of like, I give a shout out to Bayonne, New Jersey, if I see it, because that's where my mother's from. Anyone even remotely close to Northeastern Pennsylvania. If they come in from Latin America, I say bienvenidos. If they come in from Dubai, I say shukran.
I was impressed with that.
Well, I just know a few words, just enough to kind of extend.
Say hello in a webinar chat.
Yeah, and I just find that using that chat is really important, because what's happening is they're listening to us and get some content, but they're also really listening to each other. So you have to be part of that conversation.
Yeah. And, I think that I see two things. And when I go to other presentations, I think frequently people don't use the webcams. And, even if it's not perfect, you're not having a perfect hair day or whatever, people like seeing people's faces. And I actually think even more now than ever, they like to see people. And I think a lot of people worry about doing an open chat. Maybe they worry about what people are going to say. Every once in a while we get a web bomber or whatever, very rare. But I think the benefits of opening it up far outweigh any concerns that cause people to shut it down.
Yep. I've never had a problem with that. Never had a problem.
Don't say never. Don't say never.
To date, it has not been an issue, but we are prepared for it if it is.
And then I just want to give a shout out to you as a host and moderator who facilitates the process. I know you enjoy it very much. But I think every presenter is nervous. it's really interesting. We'll have superintendents come on, or famous, people who've presented in front of big rooms in person, but they haven't done this before. And I think, if you can be a host and a moderator for them, generally representing the organization that may be the sponsor of it, you can play a nice role to help them relax and make sure, kind of you've got their back during it.
That's my goal, is make people feel very comfortable. I use humor pretty strategically.
Very effectively.
several glasses of rosé, in case you're tracking along on my
I just heard you take that swallow.
And but yeah, it is interesting, and it's fun when you see them start to relax. And I have a few tricks that I do. One of which, sometimes if someone's really nervous, I'll tell them that the toughest part of a webinar, like if they're really new, Lisa, if they're first time nervous, I say just we'll acknowledge when we're 10 minutes in. Do a silent acknowledgement that if you can make it 10 minutes, you can make it 45.
Oh, wow.
That seems to help them relax quite a bit. And if you'll indulge me, since no one else is talking, this trick came from when I was an altar boy as a young kid at church, and I always was lucky enough to get chosen to serve mass at weddings. And this is in the 80s, and everyone wore heavy materials and big shoulder dresses, and people were always fainting. It was hilarious. Oh my God, it's crazy. So one time a groom, and I'm not even making this up, a groom was walking in, he goes, "I'm so nervous, I'm so nervous." And I was like 13, but like a real seasoned veteran.
You're natural from the beginning.
So I said, "Listen, guy, I serve weddings all the time. I'm 13. I serve weddings all the time. I've seen everything. All you have to do is get to the point at which you kneel down in front of the altar. Everything's golden. And when you do that, look at me and wink, because I'll be right on your right shoulder, and then you'll be golden." And sure enough, he gets to the part, he looks at me and winks, and he's like smooth sailing from there on out. He stopped sweating. He was like no longer shaking. It was hilarious. And so fast forward many years later, and I realized people really are just nervous to get started. And once they get going, they are good to go. So I do this little thing. If they're really nervous, I say, just get through 10 minutes and you're golden. And it seems to work. But yeah, having that facilitator.
If I ever do a live presentation again.
Yeah, exactly.
Give me that wink.
Yeah, just we can wink at each other. No problem.
Okay, no problem. So, and I think also, I mean, the idea you can see right here that you and Nicholas were on together. I think that when you're presenting and you don't see anybody, another face on there with you, it's harder. So I think if there are at least two people and you see another face, I think that helps a lot too.
Yep, for sure.
Yeah. And then our EdWeb team, we always have two team members who support every webinar. So they're backing each up because they get nervous too, because what if something's going to happen and they need a backup, and then they're backing everybody else up. So it's not a small thing to run one of these. And I kind of say a little bit of an analogy is, I think one reason why we are good at it is we're like the knee surgeon who does, 5 knee replacements a day. We do 350 of these a year. So we're just very practiced at it.
Right on.
But you do need to be prepared. If you're doing it on your own, you really can't minimize how much effort needs to go into making sure it runs right.
Yeah, being ready to troubleshoot is huge. Yeah,
absolutely. So let's see, what do we have next? So here we have the results sort of on two sides, right? So what are the benefits of this for professional learning for the educators who've attended? And then the benefits for the sponsor, for the content marketing and the lead generation. So those numbers are pretty amazing there, Jim. You had 4,300 registrations. This was in April. This was in the pandemic, so our average registrations have gone up to that in the past 2 months. So you got to that level. The live attendees we cap at 2,000 registrants because these platforms blow up with too many more than that, and you don't get a good experience. And then you had all those on-demand views as well. So those numbers were pretty good. Those
numbers are huge. Actually, whatever reason, I think we had a surge in demand because we're closer to. We had 4,000. on-demand views, but we are generating like 8,000 leads out of this one webinar.
Yeah, you can just add those. I mean, if you add the registrations and the on-demand views, that's pretty much.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So it's pretty wild.
Yeah. And we gave, you know, we've launched a newsletter that happens at the end of the month featuring half a dozen of the programs during the month. And we put you in that with Glows. So you got a little extra boost there.
Oh, thanks for that. Appreciate
We
it.
like doing that. And then on the other side of that, there were educators attending and viewing on demand, and they had to pass, you know, certain requirements for the number of minutes they were on. Our state approvals sometimes required that they have to pass a quiz, but we provided 5,000 CE certificates related to that event. So, I mean, you're giving them not just the experience and the information in the program, but you're giving them that takeaway.
Yep. 100%. 100%. It's all about adding value to them. And that's why, you know, that theme comes through in terms of the content, issuing CE certificates. It's funny, in the chat, they're often asking, how do I get my CE certificate? Where do I take the quiz? Where do I get the slides? So yeah, that definitely rings true.
They definitely want to know that. So I added this in, Jim. We didn't have this in the last version I sent you at midnight last night, but as I was listening to some of the earlier presentations, I just wanted to put in something just around the data that you get with your leads. This is an example of what we provide, but you know, it's just something you want to think about. Like, how are you doing this? And then what kind of data are you collecting? What kind of data can you append to that as well? You can do data appends with any of the data providers that they can help you get more information for those leads. But Jim, I think that goes back again to the segmentation at the follow-up stage of it, right? So that you can then know which are the top leads to give to a sales rep, which are the ones you're going to put into the marketing funnel for your newsletters. It'll help you manage them.
Yep, totally agree. Whether it's, you know, MCH is really strong, and your relationship with them adds a ton of value. You could use others, but yeah, that's everything you listed here is spot on.
Yeah, and you know, just want to think about that data part. And you know, you want to collect whenever you're collecting data, you want to collect it from the beginning. It's really hard to add later. So some of the questions, you know, some things we do with the registration forms is ask questions up front. That can be a nice way to get a little bit more information from your audience. The other thing is, in some cases, if a client has a newsletter and they want people to opt in, you can ask a question, you know, right up front, you know, can we add you to our newsletter? So you can be creative on what you're doing with the registration forms too. All right, so here we have, again, just some of the, you know, why is this a value? I think we've sort of talked to this. I mean, this is just an example of what educators say about why they like coming to these programs. And that's really important, right? Because that's why you're getting the attendance that you get, is because it's really valuable professional development for them. They can do it anytime, so you're getting that lead either as a live attendee or as a recorded one. And then if you can give them a certificate so that it helps them count. And you know, they're really doing this to help their students most of all. They really, I'm just so amazed in 10 years of doing this through, I mean, this crisis is the worst of all, but there have been things that have happened along the way, and you go into a program that day and you think, oh my, they're going to talk about this or they're going to talk about that. And I am just amazed at the educators and how they focus on how they can improve their practice. That's, you know, why they're there. How can they get more resources, and how's that going to help them be a better teacher or administrator and help their students? It's very important.
Yep, right there. And I've already talked about the value, so I don't need to
do that one again.
Reinforce that theme, but it's there for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, so you put down some essentials here, Jim.
Yeah, and a question came in from Deborah. Hi, Deborah. Thanks for asking a question, because I was about to hit double digits on that rosé pour, so give me some pause. Let me go through these tips, and then I'll address your question, because it starts to get to that. So when I think about this with my clients, you know, as you've seen before, we're trying to balance the interests of serving educators and what they need from a PD context. But then also we're, trying to build a business here and generate leads. But at the end of the day, I really lean towards what educators need. So if we deliver value and make it an experience that is, an enriching experience professionally, then they're going to find a way to spend time with you and your brand. So I think that's really important. And that's the kind of thing that we do. In fact, the one we just did an hour ago, we did no product demo. Sometimes we'll do a product demo just as a quick, for instance. In this case, we did work in certain elements of the product, but we didn't do any kind of demo. Instead, what we focused on was citing research. We had case studies. We found those neutral, independent things that we could create kind of a bibliography to validate what we're doing. And along the way, when we're doing this session, we're not afraid to cite others in this space, because if you have a big audience, we were talking about Glows for Education, but others were talking about Epic Books or Sora or other platforms that, either are directly related or sort of adjacent to that space. And I made a point of saying some of those names aloud because it shows that we're confident, that we're able to feel comfortable in our own skin, and we're not the center of the universe. It helps us with our credibility. But as you build the content, you have to make sure it has actionable takeaways, things that they can actually use independent of what you have to offer. So if you deliver some sort of idea that's predicated only on their ability to use their product, then you haven't given them much value. If, however, it's tips and tricks, it's strategies, it's things they can do, then you're going to find a better following happens as a result. And my last tip is to really prepare. I mean, that is what makes it work. We take our clients through tech checks, which EdWeb does, but I take them through practice runs, role play. I ask them questions. We get ready if the content doesn't work. What are we going to do? So we really make sure they bring their A game. And I tell them, look, I'm here to make you look really good, but you have to put in the work, and they always do. In terms of deciding on content or topics to address, and you're right, Deborah, it's going to be more specific than distance learning or remote learning. I mean, a lot of that has to do with, what are you seeing inside your user base? And I have found that going to sales reps, for example, and asking them, what kind of questions are you fielding that you might be struggling to answer, or that that seem to come up over and over again that are thematic? I go to the customer success group and I talk about, because they're often on the ground or on the phone, talking directly to educators, not in a sales context, but in a just get stuff done context. And that yields a lot of information. And then I'm tracking the trends. So I'm looking at who are the influencers and what are they talking about. And I find that there's no shortage of content to deliver. Now, the one thing, Deborah, and everyone else who's listening, is it can be tricky to find that balance. So, for example, not every offering is going to hit everyone's needs. I have a foreign language learning client, and they're not going to generate the same results as, say, my reading client. And that's because there's just a smaller universe of people interested in this particular topic. But that's okay, because the folks that we do draw in are going to be really strong. So, for example, we're going to start preparing some webinars in foreign languages. What we're going to talk about is the shifting role from how we balance writing and speaking. And do you want to build confidence in conversation, or do you want to build grammar and conjugation? So, I'm not an expert on foreign language instruction, but just paying attention to some of the trends by talking to sales reps, by talking to customer success, I've started to hone in on an issue that will be relevant. So hopefully that helps.
That's really helpful, Jim. I also think that, and again, going back to what Jane was talking about in the last session about use your fans. And she was talking about one thing she was talking about was, use them for testimonials as well. But a webinar can sort of almost be a testimonial, but not necessarily to be product based in general. If you have an educator who's working in, school, or an administrator, a teacher, administrator, librarian, who's an educator, an in-service educator, they're going to usually spin it the right way. It's getting back again to that peer-to-peer.
Yep. Totally. They want to look good. No one wants to rain on anyone else's parade. So they're going to bring out their best story.
They do. They're really good. And I think you brought up another point too, is a lot of people will come to us and, I might say our average registrations right now are over 4,000, but if you're doing something for middle school and financial literacy, that's going to be different, not to pick out something in particular, but there aren't roles very well defined for that in middle school. Middle school is smaller. So, you have to think about what your topic is and how you can identify the people who are interested in that, and then how broad is the market. Yep. So what do we have next? I thought I would share some data that's from a survey that we've done for 3 years in a row now. We go out and ask our members some questions like, what type of professional development helps you improve as a teacher? And we've just been stunned that the results for one are very consistent year to year. And the blue bar here is this year saying 50% saying that webinars help them the most. I think access is a big part of that too. Not every educator can go to FETC or ISTE. They can't go to them at all now. So I think the ability to connect with high quality or innovative educators and high quality programs remotely anytime is part of what drives that. Any thoughts on that?
It's all about, well, what we've talked about here, just getting a strong content that's relevant, that's just on point, and it adds real value. It's fun.
And that low score here for PD provided by vendors, I think goes back to what you were saying about if you're aligned with a community that's trusted for what they do, that isn't a vendor, I think they think of it differently. Yep, 100%. And then what's important to you? I thought this became even more, we sent this out right before everything hit with the pandemic. And we got so many comments last year about the importance of content that's current and relevant that we added it as a new factor in the survey this year. And wow, it's higher than everything. And the situation we're in right now makes that even more important. So I would say when you're thinking about that topic, you definitely want to tie it. The nice thing about a webinar is, I know you can prepare somewhat in advance, but you can also do them very quickly. And we used to say we needed 6 weeks to book them. Now we're booking them in, say, 2 weeks and getting the results we're getting. So that content can be really fresh.
Case in point today. I mean, we focused on summer reading, and it's amazing. The results are wild. They're just so good, and the ability to turn it around quickly is important.
Yeah, it's so important. This is just nutty. So at the end of 2019, our average registrations for a webinar was just under 1,500. That was over 325 webinars that we did through the course of 2019. Pretty even during the whole year. Didn't see much fluctuation during the year. A little bit of a bump in January. March is when the pandemic began. April now we're up to almost 4,500 registrants per ed webinar, and May is as strong. And I think everybody, I've gone to other presentations, everybody who's doing work online is seeing incredible increases. So, I think it bodes better for anything you would do in this world as well. And, we're not the only company doing well with doing professional learning online. I would say that's kind of a universal.
Yeah, I think that's consistent with what we're seeing. And how could it be otherwise? It has to be.
Absolutely. And it is, I mean, we've seen for so long that educators really need help with online. That's why we started EdWeb in the first place, because Facebook, came along for college students, and I saw immediately that students were now so much further ahead than their teachers. I mean, the teachers would know nothing about this, and it was like, we need to create a Facebook for teachers, so they can get used to this kind of technology. But they still struggle. Teachers as a whole still really struggle with technology. They do. And so helping them with that is really important. I think so. I think we're just summing up a little bit here, Jim, with it's easy to social distance on a webinar. They're great for educators, all roles. I think sometimes people think webinars are like just for teachers, but we do them with administrators, superintendents, librarians. They're great for all educators, and they love presenting them. They really do. They almost get hooked on. So Michelle Ludala, who's up here third from the left, is the librarian that I met at the COSIN conference 10 years ago, who gave me the idea of doing webinars like this with community. And she's presented over 100 webinars with us. Wow. And I know after she did the first one, I thought, wow, how many of these is she really going to want to do? and she loves to say, as they say, the best way to learn something is to teach it. And so she has practiced that to the hilt.
Yeah, gosh, I have like 90 to go before I can.
Yes, you do.
What to do, but I'm on pace. I'm on pace to get there, for
Yeah.
sure. I think if there are some takeaways from this session, and I'm glad you folks have stuck around. Being timely and relevant, you've heard me say this now a few times, is really important. And setting your webinar up to be engaging. Now, Lisa and I, you and I have known each other for a long, long time, since the founding of EdWeb. And so It's nice that we have that rapport. We're comfortable with each other. Sometimes you're in a position where you have a customer, you still have a little bit of a guarded kind of affect when you're dealing with, in a professional setting. But to the extent that you can prepare and break down some of that nervousness, some of that cautiousness, you're going to get a much better result by making it very engaging so that it's not dominated. Mm-hmm. All too often I see presenters coming from a good place, wanting equitable, say, time among speakers, and so they'll ask a question and invite 2 or 3 people to answer, but that's not actually how we engage. What we have to do is ask a question, point to a speaker, and then ask the next person to respond or pivot or be more agile in your approach. And that's the only way to get it done. Otherwise, what you have is one speaker saying, well, as my distinguished colleague has just said, I also, and nobody wants that kind of repetition. So we think that nature of engagement is really important on site. And there's so much in that you can use from a promotional standpoint. So as I said before, we're using email with really good outcomes. We have social as a companion piece to that. But really what we're trying to drive is an ongoing discussion. So we're building a lot of momentum going in, and then we keep the conversation going out the other side on Twitter and via email and inside EdWeb. And it's been pretty powerful. So I encourage you, whether it's you're doing it on your own or standing it up alongside EdWeb, to really think about, professional development webinars as a key marketing strategy.
Thank you, Jim. And I think the other thing that I don't talk about enough, I did allude to it earlier, is how much the presenters enjoy it. So like if we do these events with superintendents, and it is harder to get them to come to these, but with COSIN for 2 years now, we've been doing a webinar every month, inviting superintendents to come talk about digital learning issues, and they love it. They're always saying, when can I come back and do another one? And, you know, they're on a panel like this here. This is a group of librarians, but they're learning from each other in real time, live on this presentation. They're learning from the audience as well. Like sometimes we call it 3D PD because everybody's, you know, learning. But if you want to nurture a community of thought leaders who are your evangelists, inviting them to do one of these presentations is a really great thing to do. They will love you for it.
Couldn't agree more.
They will love you for it. All right, I think we might be over. We are over. So thank you all very much. I don't know how much time we have I don't know what our end time was or if any more questions, but you've got our contact information here. I know Jim and I would be happy to talk with you and tell you more. And it's really been a pleasure. Jim, I love doing presentations with you. It's really great to have our two sides go back and forth, and hopefully that helps the audience learn a little bit more that way.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. Thanks for inviting me along. Thanks everyone for joining in. I'm glad we could be here. As Lisa mentioned, we're available. The conversation doesn't have to end here. Please reach out if you need anything. And please also reach out to Advancing Global EDU. These folks have been so kind and generous in organizing this content, really drawing in from the education community to help foster our own professional development, and just so grateful to Mike and Shauna and Frank and everyone else who's been such a everyone who's been such an important part of the process. So thanks for that.
Yeah, well said, Jim. Yeah, thank you too.
Well, Lisa and Jim, on behalf of Advancing Global EDU and our other presenters, we thank you for participating and sharing your insight. Again, there's their contact information, everybody. We will be sending out the video clips to this, link to your emails, and feel free to contact our partners directly. Just again, as a senior member of Advancing Global, we're an experienced sales and marketing professional with several years of experience in the education industry. We're poised to help you for the challenges that are being presented, especially with the COVID-19, and ways to turn those into opportunities. We ask that you all stay safe and healthy, and look forward to working with you and also with our partners in the new school year. Thank you, everybody, and stay safe.
Thanks. Be well.
You're welcome.
Good night, everyone.